Hi, and welcome back to Little Troyer Farm. My name is Amanda. I am a wife, a mother to 3 beautiful children, a farm girl at heart, and lover of baking. Now, all summer long, I really have not done a ton of baking. Our trailer tends to heat up super quickly with just the summer heat in general, and so I try to run the oven as little as possible. But some things came up, and with the fall air turning a little bit cooler, I decided that I would make a few things at 7 o'clock at night because why not? I'm starting off with making just a simple baked oatmeal, and I kind of am surprised at how few people actually know about what baked oatmeal is, which I find absolutely hilarious. Super simple. I just started off with a big bowl. I threw in 4 eggs, a cup of sugar. I kind of eyeballed a 1/4 cup of oil, a teaspoon of salt, and mixed that together. This goes really well with hard-boiled eggs for quick breakfasts. It's easy to portion out and throw in freezer bags into the freezer so that you can have something quick to pull out on those busy work mornings or trying to get the kids out the door for school. Or if you're like me and you don't really want to think that hard when you wake up in the morning and the kids are saying, "Mom, I'm hungry." This is so nice to have on hand to be able to just throw it in a bowl, throw it in the microwave, and add some milk and feed those hungry tummies. So I whisk together the 4 eggs, the 1/4 cup of oil. I'm using avocado oil, my teaspoon of salt, and what am I missing? Oh yes, then I add my 2 cups of milk. I'm using farm fresh goat's milk. Obviously, this works with regular dairy, or I've even used it with plant-based milks, and it works pretty well. So give all of the liquids a good whisk together to incorporate them. I am using organic oatmeal this time just because I had purchased it recently and decided that this would be a good way to use that. If you are a gluten-free person, you can make this gluten-free very easily by just purchasing gluten-free oats. And this is a safe and gluten-friendly breakfast option for all of you people like myself who have gluten issues. So we just use 6 cups of oats and then 4 teaspoons of baking powder. So 4 teaspoons is also 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon, and that's what I did here with my fancy little red measuring tablespoon thingy. Wow, what am I supposed to call it? So I like to do everything in one bowl just because it's so much easier. It's also less cleanup. So I just spread the baking powder over the oats, and then I kind of whisk just the dry together on top, and then I kind of mix the rest of it into the whole oatmeal. I added cinnamon and it was so dusty. I was like breathing cinnamon fumes. It was terrible, but I love adding a little bit of cinnamon just to give it a bit of a kick. It's really, really nice with also raisins if you feel like adding that as well. Not including the time I spent just quickly gathering my ingredients and setting them out, this only took me 7 minutes to put together. It seriously does not take that long. Maybe the first couple times you do it as you're learning, it may take you a bit longer, but it is probably one of the easiest and fastest things that you could make. I love quick and convenient and something that takes the least amount of time possible. I also have a really fantastic banana chocolate chip muffin recipe that I would love to share with you sometime in the future because it is kind of the same idea as this. It's super quick. Usually I turn the oven on, and by the time the oven is preheated, my muffins are ready to go. So I'm putting this whole batch of baked oatmeal into a 9x13 pan. I just spread a little bit of avocado oil in there. If you had some sort of a spray oil, absolutely do that. It's pretty chill. Just use what you have. I'm all about simple, using what's in your pantry, especially if you are learning new skills or trying something for the first time. Don't be afraid of, oh, I don't have all the proper bowls or utensils. Like, honestly, if you've got a fork and like a couple measuring cups and a teaspoon, you're ready to go. Just don't overthink it. Just give it a try. I will make sure that I put all of these recipes in the description so that you can have access to them at any time. So I just sprinkled some raisins on top of half of the baked oatmeal because I'm silly like this, where I do not like raisins, but my kids love them. And so I make half of it with raisins and half of it without. I just kind of mix it into the top, and then that's it. Like, it's ready to go into the oven. Because I like to keep things simple and realistic, I'm using the exact same bowl. I just gave it a really good rinse out. I didn't even scrub it with soap. I just rinsed it out really, really well with hot water, and I got started on some homemade bread. Now, listen, I used to be terrified of anything yeast bread related. I tried it over and over again, and it never seemed to work, and I could not figure out what I was doing wrong. And guess what? I kept trying new recipes, I kept trying new techniques, and eventually I found a recipe and a method that worked for me. So to start off with, I have 1 cup and 3/4. Sorry, I should say that in a different way. 1 3/4 cup of warm water. I believe it's supposed to be around 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I do it a little bit hotter than that just because I'm trying to dissolve my 1/4 cup of honey. And as you saw, I eyeballed it because honey is so sticky and I don't really feel like cleaning out a 1/4 cup measuring cup. So I just kind of eyeball it and, hope for the best. So after I have the hot water and the honey dissolved together, I add 1 tablespoon of quick rise yeast. And then that gets a little stir with my fork just to incorporate it. And then I let it sit for that yeast to activate, start feeding on that sugar. And this is a lovely time lapse where it's kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of it starting to puff up. And so that's kind of cool to watch it do that. I left it alone for about 10 minutes. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, it was ready to go. It looked like this. I just want to make sure that it looks like it's working. It would be terrible to make some bread only to find out that your yeast was garbage. So after that, I add a 1/4 cup of avocado oil. The recipe actually calls for melted butter, but because of dairy issues in our household, I just use avocado oil. I have also used, oh my goodness, I've probably used margarine, dairy-free butter replacement. I've used olive oil. It's fairly versatile where just sub it out for what works best for you. Like I said, I use avocado oil. I think it's a healthier alternative and just it's got a higher smoke point. Anyways, we're not going to get into all of the sciencey things behind it, but I give that a little stir together and I add 2.5 teaspoons of sea salt. I should see if Amazon has a link for a similar type of tool as this because they're the coolest things, because it's got the tablespoon, it's got the teaspoon, the half a teaspoon, and a 1/4 teaspoon all in the same thing. So you're not fighting with a million different spoon sizes. It's all just right there ready to go. So when you've got something that's called for like 2.5 teaspoons, instead of counting out, a bunch of half teaspoons to use the same one, you can actually just use the same tool. So fantastic. So I gave that a stir together, and then I started adding flour. This fancy little dough hook I bought for making sourdough bread, and now I just use it for yeast bread because, guys, I have a funny story to tell you. So earlier on in the summer, or maybe late spring, our dishwasher was no longer working properly. it was working, but it was not cleaning. And I tried to clean the dishwasher, change the filters, do all of the things. But at the end of the day, it was like 12 years old. And I think it was just like, hey, retire me now because I don't want to work anymore. And so I did have a mixer and I sold it so that I could have money to purchase a dishwasher. And I'm not really sure why I said this was a funny story, but it's just a story of realistic life because I feel like sometimes we have to do those trade-offs. I went, you know what? I can make my cookies by hand and I can make my bread by hand. And so I sold my mixer for $200 and I bought a used dishwasher for $200. To me, it was more important to have a dishwasher than to have a mixer that I used a couple times a month. And so ever since then, I've been making bread by hand. So these dough hooks are definitely nice because whisks do not work for dough. It's just way too sticky, and these are a lot sturdier and do the job well. So now that I'm adding in flour, the recipe calls for, I'd have to double check it. Good thing I'm going to write this all down for you. I think it's between 5 3/4 cup and 6.5 cups of flour. And so I'm just adding 1 cup at a time until I get closer to the consistency that I want and need for my bread. And then I slow it down and I start adding smaller bits at the end. Otherwise, you can end up with a very, very dry dough, and that is very difficult to work with too. I think so often we can be scared of trying something new because we are afraid of failing or not getting it right. And guess what? When we are talking about learning a new skill, such as making bread, do not be afraid to fail. If I can encourage you at all during this video, it's to just try. Give yourself grace. Just see how it goes and don't expect to get it right the first time. Like I mentioned, yeast breads and breads in general, cinnamon buns, no. Did not work for me. I had to work at it repeatedly. It'd be dough that was too dry and, over kneaded, and, just I had to figure out how the process worked. And this recipe is so simple. I have passed it off to friends who have been using the same recipe, who they've said the same thing. Oh, I can't make bread. Why is it so hard? And I've sent them this recipe and they're like, oh my goodness, this bread is amazing. Now listen, I am a gluten-free person, and so I'm probably not the best judge of this bread. However, my husband and my kids seem to devour it, so I'm guessing that it tastes pretty good. It smells delicious, the crumb looks really nice, and overall it just, I don't know, it looks like good bread, and if I could eat it, oh, believe me, I would. Towards the end here, when I have a thicker dough, I start kneading in the last bits of flour. The dough itself is still pretty sticky, but what I'm doing is just slowly working in the flour and figuring out if it's too dry or not dry enough, or if it's too sticky, or if it's almost there. So I've got a little ways to go yet. As you work with your dough, you're going to get a feel for it. And so as I'm kneading in this flour, I'm realizing, oh, it is still pretty sticky. I honestly think that this is the area that I struggled with the most when I first started out. Because I was using a mixer, I was so confused at what point did you start timing the kneading process, because you can set your mixer to a speed that kneads it for you. And the recipe says to knead it for 7 minutes. But I would find that, about 3 minutes into it, the dough was looking too sticky again. And so then I would add more flour, and I wasn't sure if I should restart the kneading process or if I should just, only go 4 more minutes. And it would just, for some reason, my brain got confused. Call me stupid if you want, but that's how I learned, was through trial and error. And so often my loaves would come out very dry and over kneaded. And finally, I learned that a slightly sticky dough is actually better. If it's a little bit sticky at this point, by the time the first rise is done, it's actually not that sticky anymore. And so this is kind of a fine line where you don't want to add too much flour. With this batch, I actually think that I could have used less flour, but I was really, really struggling again. First time making bread in probably a few months. And so I was really struggling with, remembering the feel and at what point was that enough. And so I think I kind of over added a bit of flour in the end here. But to me, it just felt so sticky the more I worked with it. So even at this point, I would not call myself an expert because I still struggle to know at what point is it done and do I just knead it and then let it rest. While I am spending eons trying to knead this dough and figure it out, feel free to watch along or skip ahead. But in the meantime, I guess I could tell you a little bit more about myself if you care to know a little bit more about me. I grew up on a quarter section, which is 160 acres. We had cows, we had chickens and horses and dogs and cats, and we kind of just grew up, rural living. We lived about 25 minutes outside of the nearest town. I attended public school all the way from kindergarten through grade 12. And some of you are going to say, "Oh, that explains a lot." I'm just kidding. Usually it's, "Oh, those homeschoolers are so weird." Well, I married one of them, so it can't be that weird. Anyways, public schooled, grew up very much country kid. I was a tomboy. Not that I never wore a dress, but I would have way rather been outside playing sports, baseball, soccer, hockey, riding horses, being with the cows. I absolutely loved processing cows, whether it was branding at a neighbor's place or vaccinating our own cows. I absolutely adored calving season. Oh my goodness, it was my favorite time of the year. And I was so sad that we only had like 18 cows because it was always over way too fast, for my own opinion. Of course, I got attached to stray animals, stray cats, dogs that would get dumped on the side of the road where we lived, and we took home our fair share of animals that needed love. I became acquainted with death very, very early on, whether it was through cats dying or if it was through calves that didn't make it or having to put down animals that were suffering. It was not something that was shocking, I guess, because it was just a normal part of life. And while I think that many of us perhaps struggle with the idea of death, when you grow up on a farm, you tend to come to terms with it a lot earlier. And of course, if you guys have been around for any length of time, you will have heard me talk about my faith in God. And I think that's probably also part of why death is not that shocking to me, because I believe that death is a part of what happened at the beginning of time, the beginning of creation, where there was sin that entered the world, and death was a result of that. And so, in my mind, death is not shocking because it is a result of what I call a broken world. And it's heartbreaking when we lose loved ones, don't get me wrong. And it's heartbreaking when we lose a loved animal. I wouldn't say that death is pleasant, but I think that there becomes more of a understanding when, I don't know, perhaps that, the worldview, the faith that I have, I wrestle through death, but I also have hope that there is a chance to have eternal life with God if we put our faith and trust in Jesus. I remember my first dog that I ever got. It was a couple days after my horse had a really, really just a fluke incident and he passed away, and I was absolutely devastated. I had been sick really, really bad for the previous 2 weeks, and I actually found out a week later after it had happened, and my dad pulled me aside and he said, "Amanda, I'm really sorry, but your horse died." And I remember bawling my eyes out and just wondering how on earth was I going to get over it. And a few days after that, our neighbors called us and said, "Hey, would Amanda like to come and see the puppies?" They were raising black labs at the time. And of course, I love any baby animals. And so little me was like, "Yes, yes, can we go see the puppies?" And so we got to go over and see these adorable newborn puppies. And I was downstairs with our neighbor lady or sort of like an auntie to me, to be honest. And she said, "How would you like to have a puppy?" And I said, "Oh, I would love to have a puppy, but my parents keep telling me no." And she said, "Well, actually, I talked to your parents and they said that yes, you could pick out a puppy." And I just remember having this feeling of, being heartbroken about losing my horse, but also experiencing this incredible blessing and this gift from a neighbor. I mean, these puppies were sold for, a good deal of money. And I was just astonished that she would want to give me this puppy. And that was just, one experience of my childhood. And hopefully it gives you a bit of an idea of who I am and part of my life story. Of course, now I'm getting behind in all of the baking things. So the baked oatmeal took like 45 minutes to be done, which was really frustrating. I find it takes a long time, longer than 30 minutes, but whatever. The baked oatmeal came out, the bottom was all nice and golden brown, and then I moved on to shaping my bread loaves. So this recipe makes 2 loaves. It got nice and puffy. I try not to overproof my dough because that's also a really bad habit that I have. And so I just kind of punched it down a little bit to get the excess air out of it and then split it into 2 loaves. I definitely just eyeball this as well, but if you really wanted to, you could weigh out the loaves of bread on a scale or something to get like the exact same amount of bread in each loaf tin. If you're like me right now, I just don't care. Like, hey, this is fantastic. We have homemade bread, and that's good enough for me. So I just quickly form them. I'm sorry about the camera angle here that you can't see it that well, but I just form it in my hands. I used to form it on the counter, and it was always such a pain to have to clean up because it was greasy and dough would get stuck on it. So I just started forming it in the air like that. I'm sorry, I don't really have a great way to explain it other than I kind of try to make it look like a hot dog bun and then like fold it towards the bottom or like stretch it towards the bottom and then pinch the ends on the long end in towards the middle and then shape it again. Hopefully this one you can see a little bit better, but that's how I shape my loaves of bread. It doesn't work for everybody. There's all sorts of other methods of shaping loaves of bread. This is what works best for me, so this is what I do. From here, these sit for another about 30 minutes. I just keep an eye on them. This time I probably almost underproofed my loaf of bread, but like I said, I was starting all of this stuff at like 7 p.m. at night, and so I'm like, I really need to get to bed, and I don't want to be baking still at like 10 o'clock. So these guys sat for another about a half an hour and then they poofed up nice. They could have risen a little bit more, but I know now at this point that as soon as I tuck them in the oven, those guys skyrocket out of the pan. And so they went in there for about 29 minutes. And at the end of 29 minutes, they looked like this. So this is where you can see the very obvious difference in sizes. The one on the left is quite a bit smaller than the one on the right. I give them a quick tap to see if they sound right. There's also a certain temperature that you can like stick in a digital thermometer and check to see the internal temperature of the dough to see if it's done. Really helpful if you're just starting out because then you know the center of your loaves are cooked and you don't have just raw dough on the inside. I used to also grease these loaf tins and then put the bread right in there, but I had such terrible times having the bread stick in it no matter how well I greased it. So I was like, you know what, forget this. Plus then I had to wash them out, which who has time for that? So I just cut up some parchment paper and lined the loaf tins like that. Don't even have to wash the loaf tins after. I just pull that parchment paper out and pitch it, and then you have beautiful loaves of bread like this, piping hot and ready to be smothered with homemade jam or store-bought jam or local honey as well. Because it was so late that I made these loaves of bread, I just threw a tea towel over top of the loaves and let them sit overnight on the cooling rack with the tea towel over it. Then the next morning, I just cut into them with a bread knife. Typically what I do is I slice them into sandwich slices, and then I throw them into bags and throw them into the freezer, or I keep a few out to eat fresh. But believe me when I say that they go bad very, very fast because you are using wholesome ingredients and there's none of the preservatives that they use in the store-bought bread. So it will go bad a lot faster than the store-bought bread. I typically find if it's not eaten within the first 4 days, then you better be looking very closely for mold because it does go bad pretty quick. So I like to slice it up so then it's easy to grab it out of the freezer. And that's just what works for our family. Some people, eat a whole loaf of bread in 1 or 2 days. So you could freeze it in a whole loaf, bring it out and thaw it, and then slice it when you're ready to eat it as well. On these loaves, I typically get about 12 decent sized slices of bread. Here I'm counting them because I'm OCD like that. I'm not really sure. I just love to know how many slices I am getting out of my loaf of bread. Isn't that so pretty? I don't know, it just makes me so happy to see homemade bread all sliced up. It just reminds me of my childhood and my mom who made us homemade bread, and we'd walk in the door after school and she would have made us bread and it was all ready for a snack. And so after I sliced it up, I did just that. I added some raw local honey, and actually this is from a field like 2 minutes down the road from us, so it's very, very local. And I smothered it in honey and fed it to the kids for lunch, and they gobbled it up so fast and no complaints whatsoever. Hopefully this video was somewhat educational or entertaining or what have you. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of this channel. Let me know if you'd like to see maybe some more baking or cooking things. I'm not much of a cook, but I do enjoy baking, and I obviously do cook for my family. So let me know if that's your sort of thing, and hopefully I can share some more recipes with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.